there's a great Richard Pryor joke that I keep on, that plays in my mind all the time. He's, you know, you remember him, he's this amazing guy, the story he tells is he's in bed doing his wife's best friend in the bedroom, in their bed, and she walks in, surprised, and catches him and starts shrieking and yelling. He jumps up with a sheet around him and denies that what he was doing is doing, and eventually he says to her, "Are you going to believe me or your lying eyes?" he says. And so you had this amazing campaign in which George Bush was out there every night saying, "The war is going well. We are winning the war against terrorism." And every night the American people could look with their lying eyes at television and see that, of course, it isn't. And the press, as Kerry began to move a little bit to be more critical of the war, the press became more critical. They could sort of come inside a little bit. And you could see in the last month or so of the election a distinct swing in terms of at least Kerry, whose position all along was he could win the war better. You know, his actual campaign was amazing to me, because he said, "I can win this war." He said in the debates, he said, "Mr. President," he said, "I can win this war. I can get the Allies to come, the French and the Germans, presumably to change the nationality of the corpses, and or perhaps the color of the corpses. I don't know, maybe some third world countries would go in. I don't know what he was thinking about. I can improve the Iraqi army and I can improve the Iraqi military," he would say. "And I would do more, Mr. President," he'd say to Iran. "I would not let Iran get away with its excursions in the nuclear technology." And he would espouse this view, which is by any standard an extremely conservative view for a Democratic candidate. And then the President, Bush, would then say, "Liberal, liberal, liberal." So it was all sort of madness. And the important thing about the election that I don't think is said is this. It's, yes, Kerry was a lousy campaigner. And yes, there was a moment there at the end, in the last few weeks, when he began to get going critically of the war, talking nuts, forget what he said about winning it. He was talking about the mistakes made, and it was clear the election was close. And what did George Bush not do? He didn't back down for a minute on the war, even with his presidency at stake. And I think this is really interesting, given where we are now and given what's going to happen, I believe. He didn't back down for 1 minute. He said, I couldn't think, in response to the direct question he couldn't think of a mistake he made. His vice president said we do. Cheney said we do everything exactly the way we did. What I'm positing is this. He risked his presidency on that war. That war means an awful lot to him. The war in Iraq is not just some device. Michael Clare here has written eloquently and about oil. I would disagree with him in this area. I think this president truly is not driven by Israel or oil and what he's doing in Iraq. Of course, they're terribly important considerations, very important, but the core thing for him is he believes in what he's doing. Whether he's a neoconservative or what, he's not lying about what he says. He believes it. And I do think he risked this. He could have moved to the middle and gotten an awful lot of votes. He could have moved in. A lot of people were on the fence about him because of the war and the prosecution of the war. And he chose to stay out there. In my book, and this is why this is a uniquely sort of frightening time for all of us, and a time in which, I can get a lot of credit for being a journalist, but the reality is I'm not sure nothing really matters, because as much as I think I'm wearing the white hat for writing sort of in the New Yorker an alternative history of the war, in the last 3 or so years, since 9/11 anyway, taking a lot of exception to what he does, I'm absolutely convinced I'm wearing the right hat. I think George Bush also thinks he's wearing the right hat. He's just as convinced of his virtue as I am of mine. And here's how it plays out. He is going to keep it up. This is not, let me redefine some things for you. And I think many of you, I'm just giving you some different ways of looking at it. Forget the word insurgency, that's wrong. It's not an insurgency. An insurgency suggests we won the war and an opposition began, a guerrilla opposition, and we're now fighting a group of in opposition, sort of a guerrilla group. We're doing counter-guerrilla or counter-terror operations. The people we're fighting are the people we started the war against. We're fighting the war. This is the war. It's just not fought on the terms we all recognize in America because it's a different culture that we don't pay much attention to and haven't. At least the people in Washington don't, the people running the government. The people that are running this war, basically Sunni Baathists, now aided and abetted by an incredible array of nationalists, people that whatever their feelings were about Saddam and the Sunni party and the Ba'athist party and whatever intolerance there was in terms of religion, gone. Because any of you know from history, you tell me a time an occupier has won a long-standing war. Almost impossible. We're an occupier, and so we've turned a lot of potential allies of ours, some of the Shia, some of the other tribal factions. They basically have joined in what we call the insurgency. It's a war. A smart guy I know in the military, and by the way, one of the things that you have to understand that as Iqbal did, by the way, in his relationships with the leadership of his government all along, that anywhere in our military is full of people that respect the First Amendment and the Constitution as much as anybody here. The CIA and the FBI, there are a lot of people that I know who have an enormous, particularly since they have so much power, an enormous faith and are as troubled as all of you about what to do and how to behave and whether to go public, which they don't do. And we can talk about that later. I don't have an answer for why we don't have a four-star general that knows we can't win this war speaking, but they don't. They'd probably be pilloried by the press first at this stage. Anyway, far from being a hero, treated as a hero. So this is a guy that in my book believes very much what he's doing and some concrete facts that are hard to get at. First of all, you should know something about Fallujah. Fallujah is not just some city. It's the capital of Sunni Wahhabi. Wahhabi is one of the most fanatical factions of religion in the Sunni religion. There's a whole, obviously it's complicated. There's many different aspects to the Sunni religion, but Wahhabism focused in Saudi Arabia is very, very stern, very strict. The mosques there that were destroyed by us range in age, 3, 4, 5, probably more, hundreds of years of age. It played a terribly important role when the British overran everybody in 1920. It was the place where the Sunnis stood up the most against the British, has a famous history of tradition of standing up for independence, for internal values. And we've basically committed ourselves to continued Saudi support for what we call the insurgency. I'll just say the insurgency, because it's too hard to, it's the Sunnis and the Baathists minus Saddam and a bunch of leaders and nationalists. And they've cut across, the opposition has cut across all strata. It's they're in basically total control. My friends in the intelligence community tell me north to south, east to west, they're basically in much more control than anybody else. There will be not, unless we have fake gerrymandered elections, there will be no elections there in January. It's impossible. And it's equivalent to having an election here without California, New York, and New Jersey and Pennsylvania voting. It can't happen. Bush may want to. He's beyond. I don't think so. There is a good side to this, which is, I promise you, I'm not selling uppers on the corner, to make you feel better. But we might as well see the devil. We have it right in front of us. We know exactly what it is. There's no pretense anymore about where he's going. The Gonzalez nomination made it clear. He's going to make a direct attack on the Supreme Court. It's going to be direct and systematic. You're going to see an extremely bad appointee, and they're going to do everything they can to muscle it through, change the filibuster rule. It's going to be a complete hoedown. But at least we're going to have it in front of us. There won't be anything down and dirty. And it's not subtle.